So this is about management, seasonal management. I think that of all the domesticated animals that we have had, bees are the easiest. Oops, sorry guys. I think I have a, I don't know why it's starting. Okay, so, you don't really, the general cycle of bees is lots of stuff happens in the spring and early summer. There's a bunch of stuff happening in the spring, but you don't really have to be involved in that too much. And then you'll be heavily involved in your bees in the fall, and then not so much in the winter. So the bees overwinter in a lot of stinging insect species. The only individual that overwinters is the queen, but in the beehive there are winter bees that overwinter with the queen. And winter bees are different than the bees that you see in the spring and summer and into the fall. First of all, there are no male bees in the winter bee group. And the winter bees are fuzzier and fatter than summer bees. And the winter bees live 7 months, and the regular bees that we generally see live 45 days. So there's a significant difference between those winter bees and the bees that we see in the summertime. So the queen will start to lay brood in February or March, depending on the temperature. And what you will want to do in the springtime is you'll want to see if there is, if your hive is still alive. And so one way that you can tell if your hive is still alive is if there's fecal matter outside. And this picture that you see here with the yellow dots on the snow shows that your beehive is probably still alive because the bees, it's warm enough for the bees to come out and go to the bathroom. However, a lot of them don't end up going back into the hive, so the dark spots on the snow are probably dead bees. They go out, they go to the bathroom, and it's like, oops, it's a little too cold, and they fall down dead in the snow. So I'm sure you read that you don't want to open your hive until it's at least 50 degrees outside. And then when you're opening the hive, it's basically just to look inside the shim to see if there are any bees alive. So does everyone know what the shim is? Okay, do you know how, when you put your hive away for the winter, you'll probably have a empty super box on top. That's the shim, and that's where you would put bee food and perhaps a protein patty and maybe some desiccant to keep your hive dry. Anyway, so in February and March, if there have been February's, Marches, even January's where it's been warm enough and we've seen activity outside the hive, so you know your hive is alive. If it's a 50+ degree day, you might open it up to see if there's activity in the shim. You might open it to see if the bees are eating whatever food you put on for the winter. But you don't really want to do much more than that. You just have to hope that things are going on inside the hive. You certainly don't want to, you don't want to open your hive when it's cold outside. Kevin, my husband, had a hive that he placed on the South Hill with a lady who wanted to have a hive in her yard, but she didn't want to take care of it. And she wanted to see how the bees were doing all winter. And so she opened it multiple times, opened the hive multiple times during the winter. And needless to say, the hive did not survive. So when you can finally get into your hive, when it's more than 60 degrees and it's hopefully calm and not raining or snowing outside, you're gonna get into your hive and see why it died, if it died. So we're just, overwinter losses just assumes that it died. So there's a variety of reasons. The most likely reason is probably virus load from varroa mites. That is basically what is killing the bees. But other reasons that you might see are that you have too much moisture in your hive. You can see the third picture down. It looks like the sugar that was on top of the hive is totally kind of moldy and gross. And it's pretty clear that there was too much moisture in this hive. And we all hear that a wet bee is a dead bee. Your hive might have gone into winter without enough bees to keep the queen warm. Your hive might not have had enough food. It might have been too cold at a certain time, and the cluster was not able to move to a frame that had food on it. And again, the most likely reason is that there were too many varroa mites, or the varroa mites infected the bees with viruses, or weakened the bees so the bees were infected with viruses and they just couldn't make it over winter. It's a good idea to try and figure it out and maybe not do the same thing the next year. And that's one reason that you might want to keep a bee journal so that you can log what is happening with your hives. Are there any questions? Because overwinter losses is something that people generally have a lot of questions about.
Have you ever had a hive like make it through winter and then the queen just disappear, and then have a laying worker come when you do your first full inspection in the spring?
I mean, we've had it where it's pretty clear that there is no queen in the hive, but I can't say that that's happened over winter. But it's very possible the queen could have died. She froze, or she was weakened, or who knows what happened, or she fell down, who knows. So I don't know if you guys know or have really thought about this, but the bees, individual bees, are not the organisms. The hive is the organism. The only bee that's really important in the hive is the queen. And even she is replaceable, obviously. So when the queen disappears, the hive as an organism wants its genetic material to be disseminated throughout the world. And so the workers who are not fertile will start to lay infertile eggs. Infertile eggs produce drones. So those workers will, feed the drones, bring the drones up, and send the drones out to mate with other queens in the hopes that the hive's genetic material will be shared out in the world at the drone congregation area. So if you see a lot of drones in your hive, that's probably a good sign that your queen is either not viable or not there. So, are there any other questions? Okay. So, and I think many of you have probably gone through this. Packages come in April, and at least here in our part of the woods, they come generally mid-April. This year, package day was on a lovely day. It was warm and wonderful to put the bees in the hive on package day, but we've had package days where it snowed. And you don't really have a choice about when the packages come. They just do on a certain date. So you, as a beekeeper, can choose to get a package of bees, or you can choose to get a nuke. And again, in the manual, they describe what the process is to getting a package together, and they talk about getting nukes. We have kind of decided that we're not going to get packages anymore. When I hear people describe their bees as Italian bees or Carniolan bees, I think that that's false advertising, because in the United States, there's nothing but American bees. So, and I heard a talk about how beekeepers thought that they had Italian bees, and they felt that these bees were really gentle, and they noticed that these bees were yellow, and so they decided that they were going to breed bees to be yellow, and those yellow bees would be Italian bees. And so the scientific, the science of genetics really didn't apply when they were breeding their bees. Anyway, it's been illegal to import bees since the early 1900s. Let's see. So nukes are available for a longer period of time than packages. You can get and basically what a nuke is a queen. Generally there's some brood in there, some workers, and a little bit of food. And there's 5 frames. So it's basically it gives you a head start on a hive. And you would just place the nuke in a hive body and let it go. Problem with nukes over packages is that it's possible that the nukes will have diseases or mites, more likely that they'll have diseases and mites than the packages. In May, you'll want to take a look at your hive and see if there is a lot of activity, a lot of bees in there, and see if there's swarm cells. And if so, you're going to want to split your hive. And I was talking to Sherry about this just now. Generally, the way that we split the hive is that we'll go through the hive and divide frames between the 2 hives, making sure that there are eggs in both of the hives. If there are swarm cells, we'll put the swarm cells in the new hive and maybe leave a swarm cell in the old hive. So again, we'll split up the frames. Then we'll take the hives and face the entrances of the hive toward each other. So we'll turn them 90 degrees, and the entrance of the hive will face each other, and we'll leave it like that for about a day. And the workers will come in and they can't tell which hive is their hive because the pheromones are the same. Then after about a day, we will close up one of the hives and move it about 15 feet away. And then, turn the hive so that the bees come in. And we generally do that at night. So when the bees get up the next morning, they orient themselves on the hive that they are in, and away they go. And then we'll keep an eye on it to make sure that there's brood showing up in both of those hives. And that's basically how we split hives. So are there any questions? And this is a period of time in May, late in May and early June, that we start to get swarm calls. People find swarms on their property. So when you get into the hive, what is it that you want to see? You want to see brood, you want to see eggs, and you want to see larvae. The frame in front of you, the brood is nice. You can tell it's a nice yellow color. You might see a browner color on older wax. You want to see a good brood pattern. That means that it's not spotty, that there is brood throughout. Generally, what you'll see is honey and pollen on the outside. You'll have a frame like this. There'll be kind of an arc with brood in the center, and there'll be honey and pollen on the outside edges of the frame. Basically, that's the workers will go out, get what they need to feed the larvae, and then come back and feed them. So in this picture, you can see some larvae down toward the bottom. It looks like little worms in the bottom of the cell. picture isn't clear enough to see eggs, but an egg will look like a grain of rice. And when it starts out, it's sticking straight up in the cell. And what you're hoping for too is that there's one egg per cell. You will see holes in your brood, within your brood area. The bees will do this on purpose to help with ventilation. But what you don't want to see is like one cap cell here and then one cap cell over here and another cap cell over there. You want to see kind of a bunch of cap cells all together. You want to look for supersedure cells and swarm cells. Supersedure cells are that big peanut-shaped cell that you find in the middle of the frame. And that basically means that your hive has decided that it wants to get rid of the queen. The hive will build supersedure cells and swarm cells and not put any eggs in them or larvae in them. So you may want to take a look and see if it's capped or if it has larvae in it, because they're just planning for the future. Swarm cells are the peanut-shaped cells that are down at the bottom of the frame. If you see those, you might want to consider splitting your hive. And you want to make sure that there's plenty of space for expansion in your hive. So sometimes you may want to remove a honey frame, a frame that's got capped honey on it, and you can put in an empty frame or a frame, give your bees a head start by putting a frame in that already has wax on it, cells on it. And then you can put the honey frame in the freezer and save it for a later day. You can use it to feed your bees later. So are there any questions?
I have a question.
Okay.
How is the best way, what is the best thing to put your frames in to put them in the freezer? Like, would you wrap them with plastic wrap? I tried a grocery bag. It did not work.
You know those big kitchen garbage bags?
Yeah.
Those work pretty well.
Okay.
For the tall garbage cans. We've
Okay.
also, as long as we've also actually put our frames into a plastic box that we sealed, and that worked all right. It's as long as it's not hot and melts, it was good to go.
Okay. Cool.
Keep room in your freezer. Okay, so like I said, the hive is the organism. The individual bee is not the organism. So the way that the hive reproduces is it splits. It's kind of like, the amoebas that you watched when you were in high school through the microscope, when they would come together, split, and then become two amoebas. That's basically what's happening with the hive. Just a lot more activity. So a swarm happens when the bees are running out of space, and you will have a clue upon inspection if you start to see queen cups at the bottom of the frames. The bees will, the egg laying slows down and stops of the old queen. The bees will make her move around, exercise. They might put her on a diet so that she slims down so that she can fly when the time comes to swarm. When the new queen is about ready to hatch, about the old queen and about half of the worker bees will leave. They will fly to a location that's usually relatively close to the hive. And then scout bees will go out and look for a new location, and they will come back and they will dance on the outside of the swarm, and they will try to convince the other bees that their location for a new hive is the best. And once they convince enough bees that their location is the best, the swarm will fly off and go to that location. Are there any questions about swarms?
If you don't want them to swarm, would you just cut out the swarm cells and leave the supersedure cells?
No. I would not cut out the swarm cell. Because it's probably not going to stop them from swarming. They'll just build a new swarm cell. So I would, if you see swarm cells, you should probably split your hive. Another thing that you can try to do is that you can try to add more, like another box. Like Rogelio said that he has 4 boxes on his hive. You can try and do that and just give them more space. But frankly, I'm not sure that that would work because in the wild, bees will, a beehive will be about the size of a single box. So it's possible that at some point the bees they don't care that you give them more space. They're just going to split because they need to split for reproduction purposes, and they'll just go. So
I did split my bees. It's just they took off. So
they took off?
yeah, I split them into 2, and I have the other one's about 2 deep frames, and this one's just they just keep going up. So
That's interesting. So when you split them, did you put them very far away from each other?
I split them and I put them about 100 feet away, and now they're back together. But the intercepts are facing east and north, I think. I have them currently at.
Oh, you have them facing in different directions?
Yes.
Oh.
After I moved them back together, I changed it up.
Okay. Mary, did you have something to say?
Yeah. Also, he mentioned, if you have swarm cells and supersedure cells together, would you get rid of the swarm cells? And I don't think you would generally have swarm cells and supersedure cells at the same time.
You might, because the bees will build the cells without necessarily filling them.
Okay, yeah.
In preparation.
Yeah, that could be, but it's, don't get rid of any queens.
Yeah, no, don't get rid of any queens. I mean, the thing is that, like, Mary said that she requeens. We never requeen. We let the hive requeen itself because we figure that we want the queens to be genetically viable in the Pacific Northwest. A lot of the queens that come in packages come from Hawaii or California. And so, they haven't been bred for the particular environment that we live in. And so we figure, we'd like them to overwinter and then produce a new queen. Plus, we're lazy beekeepers. I do have to admit that, having to search for the queen, kill her, and then replace her, that's just too much work. So, any other questions? Oh, sorry, I kind of got ahead of myself. So you can create a split to prevent a swarm. You can, like I said, add a box or add some more space so that the queen has some place to lay and there's space for nectar. I'm not exactly sure what the ventilation thing is. And here you see a swarm cell that has been, the queen has come out of it. So she may be around the hive. And she either will kill the other queens in the other swarm cells, or you might have more than one swarm. Tom Seeley, who's a bee researcher out of Cornell, basically has shown that each swarm, as the first swarm has a good chance of survival. As you go through each after swarm, their chance of survival gets lower and lower, simply because they're leaving with fewer and fewer bees. Okay, so summer. Summer is basically the time to prepare for winter. It's hard to believe, but it's kind of like the ant and the grasshopper, right? One of the things that you should be doing even in early summer is starting to check for mites and taking steps to get rid of mites in your hive. And there's different ways to do that. There's soft chemical ways and hard chemical ways. You have to be very careful because you cannot use certain of the chemicals on your hive when you are when you have supers on your hive, because those chemicals can end up in your honey. You want to monitor for food stores. I kind of told you our story about how we thought, woohoo, we're going to have a great hive in the winter, and then a few weeks later, they had eaten a whole bunch of their honey. So that's where weighing the hives comes in handy. And if you don't get into your hive every week or every 2 weeks, it might be a good idea to weigh your hives every couple of weeks and keep track of the weight. You're gonna want to see if your box is filling up, if it's time to add a super. I would think that most supers would be going on here about now, because this is the time of the nectar flow. I'm not sure how much nectar we have because we've had such a dry spring, but essentially when your second box gets about 3/4 of the way full, you're going to want to put a super on it and start to collect additional honey. And you may end up having to feed your bees. Again, it just really depends on what your hive is doing. If it's not gaining weight and not bringing nectar in, or the weight is falling during the summer, you may have to feed. So summer moves into fall. Honey supers come off. I think in our mind, the honey super comes off actually before fall. Usually we're taking our honey supers off anytime between August 15th and the beginning of September. And then once the honey supers come off, we generally start to feed with a 2-to-1 sugar solution. And that sugar solution, we keep feeding until either the bees stop taking it or it starts to get cold at night. So probably around the end of September, we would take the sugar solution off of the hives, and then we would install the moisture control shims. We would feed the bees. We just feed them granulated sugar. So we put down a piece of newspaper that doesn't completely cover all of the frames, and then we just pour some sugar on top of that. We might add protein, although in our experience, the bees have not taken protein in the fall or winter. And then we cover it, and that's basically what we do in terms of feed. We're also treating our bees for mites. We use oxalic acid, and so we would probably try to treat our bees sometime in the summer, and then sometime a couple of times in the fall, maybe mid-September and then maybe early October, twice. We don't generally test for varroa mite. Again, we're lazy beekeepers. We assume that our bees have varroa. You might want to relocate your hive. In our experience, we generally move our hives in front of the south-facing wall of our garage. The idea is that it keeps the wind off the hives. It also heats up the hives, which allows the cluster that's inside the hive during the winter to expand and potentially get more food. You may want to put a mouse guard on the front of your hive in the fall. And a mouse guard is basically hardware screen that has, large holes in it, about 1/4 inch holes in it, so that the bees can get through, but critters cannot. And I'm not sure what the top entrance is. Our hives all have a notch in them so that the bees can get in through the top. And maybe what they're talking about is that notch because you want to have ventilation. So we never put the bottom board on our hives, and we have a notch at the top, and the idea is that the air is circulating from the bottom to the top. And that's part of the reason why the newspaper doesn't cover the entire frame. So are there any questions about fall or summer or spring?
I just wanted to add that when it's summer and everything's going, everybody gets along. But when that first cold snap comes, that's when you really have to watch the wasps and hornets around your hives. Right now, everybody's happy, they're sharing, it's great. But when it gets to what I call fummer, then you got to start, and you may have to restrict more because the bees can't fight off, the wasps.
Yeah. Yeah, starting about mid-August, you're going to want to wear that veil, those gloves, the jacket, because the bees tend to get a little bit pissy. They assume that you, like a bear or a skunk or other animals, including the wasps, want their honey and their brood to eat. And so they tend to sting and get a little bit angry at folks that are in their hives. So once you put your bees to bed, you the thing that you want to make sure that you do during the winter is make sure that there's ventilation. And what that requires is that you clean out the hive entrance from time to time. So we've kind of dispensed with mouse guards because, like I said, we're lazy beekeepers. And I think we have found a mouse in our hive one time, but one time in 9 years doesn't make it worthwhile for us to put mouse guard on. And the mouse guard makes it hard to clear out the hive entrance. So basically it snows or it doesn't snow. Every once in a while we take a big long screwdriver and stick it in the bottom of the hive and just pull out all the dead bees. And but you have to be careful because sometimes the bees come out. The live bees come out. They're not very happy about somebody sticking something in there to clean out the dead bees. So once the temperature hits 57 degrees, the bees start to cluster around the queen. And the size of the cluster depends on the temperature outside. So there's a core to the cluster. The queen is at the center, and there's bees around the queen, but there's movement there. And then there's a mantle, and those bees stay out there. And the bees will change kind of as a guard. And the bees will change positions as they need food. So the core, core bees need food, the mantle bees will move in, and the core bees will move out to the mantle. The size of the cluster depends on the temperature outside. When it's cold, the cluster is smaller. As it warms up, the cluster expands. When the cluster is expanded, it makes it easier for the bees to get food. Because if you remember, inside the hive, there are frames sticking down. So the cluster is around those frames. They might be across several frames. When the cluster expands, the bees can go to other frames that have honey on them. So one of the reasons that we move our hives in front of the garage is that that wall, the sun hits it, the hives warm up a little bit more than maybe out in the field, and the bees are able to break the cluster a little bit easier and perhaps get food. And so you can see down in that bottom picture a cluster of bees. And then you can also see over there that the infrared, the yellow shows where the cluster is, and it's quite warm. The inside of the hive is the same temperature as the ambient air. So the bees are basically focusing their energy on keeping that cluster and the queen warm. And that is it. Are there any questions?
Do you use a bee blanket?
No. There are people that do insulate their hives. I saw a presentation by a guy up in the Yukon who he definitely insulates his hives, but we have not insulated our hives. And we don't think that, it doesn't make that much of a difference here, I don't think. But again, you're the beekeeper. If you want to try it, go for it. Besides, like I said, we're lazy, so that takes additional work.
I insulated my beehives with 2-inch foam from Home Depot. So,
Yeah, that's what the guy up in the Yukon does.
yep. It's not that hard to do, and I just figured I'd give it a try.
I think, obviously it's something that you can do. I think in general, it's better, it's a good idea to make sure that your hives are sheltered from the north wind. Yeah.
So is the foam that you put around your bees, was that the hive that made it?
I only had one beehive last year. Once I start out, now this year we have 4 beehives. I probably wouldn't do it this year, but it was just as a test to see how it do. I might do 2 and 2, see what happens with the beehives.
Okay, yeah, because have some of that stuff I was wondering, so.
Yeah, no, I was gonna start testing with it, but currently I'm a farrier school and I have not done much for my bees, so.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know so there's the website called The Scientific Beekeeper, and it's run by a guy down in California. I don't know if he would insulate his bees. He's in Northern California, so I guess it's a possibility, but probably.
I don't think Randy does. Randy Oliver, no. Too warm.
But like I said, I saw this guy up in the Yukon who does insulate his hives, and I think he just uses that 2-inch foam that Rogelio was talking about.
Okay.
Okay, that's it.
Yeah.
Okay, that's it. And I'm gonna stop recording real quick because I forgot to start us. Let's see, but, well, somewhere there's,
It's that